Now, the final section that we're going to be discussing today is what is called integral livelihood. Now, the Buddha basically put this into the Eightfold Path because what he wanted the people practicing this way of liberation was for them not to be earning their living or their keep using nefarious or illegal activities to do so. In other words, things that would compromise the precepts or compromise their own morality in doing so. The reason being is because, like we discussed before, deceiving yourself, lying to yourself, being expedient, doing things in a way that is manipulative or controlling are things that even if we get away with them, we always feel. So in going into these things with the right intention or the integral intention, as we discussed in this episode, our livelihood is no different. The way that we bring in resources, the way that we earn our keep in order to sustain our lives is very important to make sure that it is done in an integral way with a sense of intentionality. Now, what this is to say is that what you do for work, what you do to earn a living is not conflicting with your liberation. It is not causing you to feel a lack of acceptance for yourself or an attempt to compartmentalize your actions because they don't actually go with your own moral code personally. Now, this is really important because there are people sometimes that they will be doing their job and they'll be forced to do something for that job, if they intend on keeping the job, that is going against their own morality, going against their own code of conduct, and they will typically default to a statement like, I'm just doing my job. Now, this default to the statement of I'm just doing my job is almost a form of performance, but as well as a form of resistance and expediency. We are resisting our own moral code because we've agreed to do this job. We're performing for the job that is asking us to do something that is not really okay with us. And we're being expedient by not necessarily taking a moment to decide what's important, or even to ask ourselves, is there another way of achieving the same outcome? Is there another way of fulfilling the same intention that this particular task is asking me to do? So when we default to this, we're not practicing a sense of integral livelihood. What we're doing instead is we're actually using our livelihood in a way that is performative, expedient, and resistant to who we are as a person. Now, there's a few different sources that I drew from to develop what integral livelihood means from a Zen Stoic perspective. And one of those actually comes from the book Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is really interesting because it was written by Solomon, who at the time was the richest, most successful person. And in this writing, what he discusses is how the person with great ambition and great riches and the person who is poor both end up meeting the same fate when it comes to their death. Now, this seems like a grim way of describing this in a way that maybe can even allude to the frame of reference that what does it matter how much ambition I have with my livelihood? We're all just going to die anyway. But that is not at all the case of what we're discussing here. What this is to say, and what Solomon was discussing in Ecclesiastes, is this idea that our work is not about accumulating as much riches as we possibly can. It's not about just enjoying the material pleasures of life, because all of those are fleeting. They are vanities, if you will, right? And this idea of vanities is that vanities are futile pursuits. They're, like he would talk about in the book, chasing the wind. And the idea here is that it's not about how much we earn or how much material wealth we can bring into our lives, but are we enjoying life? Are we having a good time with our lives? Is our life meaningful to us? Is it fulfilling to us? And this goes really well in line with something that Marcus Aurelius said, which is that your only real job is to be a good human. And that is the fundamental beginning of this. And when it comes to an integral livelihood, it's about earning your living in a way that allows you to be a good human effortlessly, that you don't have to convince yourself to do this, and you're able to actually enjoy yourself. Now, bringing this into a Zen concept, Zen talks about this idea of making practice the goal, which is essentially a way of saying not to be attached to the outcome, but rather than being attached to the outcome, fall in love with the process of what it is that you're doing. That is making the practice the goal, is to love the work itself, not just do it because you're attached to the outcome. When we think about just being attached to the money or the fame or the prestige that work is going to bring us, that is when we're chasing vanities, when we're chasing the wind. And one thing that is said in Ecclesiastes that I remember when I read it, it riveted my soul. And keep in mind, like, I'm not a religious person. I don't consider myself a Christian by any means, but I'll still go to texts like Ecclesiastes and read these things because they fall very in line with this philosophy. And the quote from it was this: better to have one hand full of tranquility than two hands full of toil chasing the wind, which is reminds me greatly of how I used to be before I really dove into Zen Stoic full time, which is being immersed in the hustle culture, always having work to do, always being busy, trying to go, being, team no sleep and all these weird cliches that we have these days around work. And when immersed in the hustle culture, I was always working, and sure, I was making money, but at the same time, I remember I felt like I was losing myself, like I was losing my soul in the name of being productive, in the name of producing content, in the name of producing money, in the name of producing sales. And I remember the way that I went about this, from what a lot of old teachers and mentors would teach me, was almost like this high pressure vibe that I always carried with me when it came to my work. I was always, always had this nervous energy that I always had to be moving and doing something and being productive all the time. And if I wasn't, then I was a failure. And I remember this was driving me insane, because I was basically in my work doing all the delusions and none of the intentions when it came to why I was doing what I was doing, right? I was resisting my own feelings about doing things that I didn't think were right. I was trying to control the outcome of everything. I was using weird sales tactics that made me feel like shit all the time. I was being expedient by always trying to, shortcut and make myself look more prestigious, which, kind of put me into that realm of performance. And I remember I just couldn't live with myself when I was practicing these things in the attempt to build a business, in the attempt to sell things when it came to my coaching and whatnot. So I remember for me, I was not practicing an integral livelihood. It was going against my liberation because it was making it really difficult for me to accept myself in the whole scheme of things. So what I started asking myself which was a way to kind of gut check myself and allow me to live in a way that was in integrity with Zen Stoicism, was to ask myself this one question where I said, what would it look like and how would I need to operate if my business was built completely on referrals? And what this forced me to do is to really think about how I made people feel when I was servicing them through coaching. It not only made me focus on how I was servicing people when it actually came to the coaching, but also thinking about what is their whole journey into this whole practice of Zen Stoicism and into this liberation coaching that I'm taking them through. And it made me think about how I was selling my services, as well as not just how I was delivering, but also how I was selling. And in this whole process of thought, I was able to actually come to a place where I would be very, very sincere in the sales conversations and make sure that the person actually was a good fit, not just that they could pay for the service. I made sure that I was really intending a sense of understanding and curiosity about their situation. So I was really practicing these intentions. And by practicing the intentions that we had talked about before, it allowed me to be earning a living in a way that didn't just abstain from conflicting in my liberation, but it also actively supported my liberation because I was able to be me. I was able to be sincere. I knew I wasn't deceiving anybody. I knew I wasn't, trying to manipulate things in a way that would just be in my interest, but actually servicing people. Because at the end of the day, what I learned about referrals and business is that if somebody loves your service, but you made them feel weird in buying your service, they might love you and what you gave them, but they're not going to refer their friends to that. They're not going to refer the people that they love to that. So for me, in order to really have a business that operated through integrity, it took me asking that question. It took me coming into this space where it wasn't necessarily the path to making the most amount of money the quickest, but it was the path that allowed me to feel fulfilled and feel joy when it came to my work, rather than feeling like I had to hustle constantly. So when you're operating with a sense of integrity, it allows you to actually feel fulfilled in your work. It allows you to actually feel joyful in your work and not to take things so seriously, but to take them sincerely, which there's a massive difference in that. When we're taking things super seriously when it comes to our work, we're intending a sense of control. We're becoming very rigid and we're allowing ourselves to get angry about things that don't necessarily go our way, rather than be able to enjoy the process with the ebbs and flows. Hopefully, this episode has good enough editing by the time we're done that you don't see all the logistical mishaps that we had. Because on this particular episode, we had the lights flickering, we had, people coughing in the background, we had my dog coming in, we had all kinds of things that didn't happen on our first few episodes. But the whole point of this is that if you're doing something that allows you to live and have an integral livelihood with the way that you operate in your work, these mishaps don't necessarily upset you, but you're able just to ride the ebbs and flows of when they do come up, because inevitably things are not always going to go your way. And we were able to still enjoy this process, or at least I was. I don't know about Lewis in the back over there, but we were able to enjoy the process despite there being these mishaps. Because the whole idea here is, if we were to allow ourselves to get super annoyed or get really angry about the fact that things weren't going as planned or things weren't going our way, then that would not be a practice of integral livelihood. Those emotions and those attempts to control and resist what was happening consistently throughout this particular episode would have conflicted with the liberation that we are in pursuit of, that we are aiming at each and every day by practicing Zen Stoicism. So when it comes to having this integral livelihood, it's about choosing work that doesn't conflict with liberation, as well as that actively supports your liberation. This does not mean you need to do things that are your passion in life. You don't have to always do work that you love necessarily. As a neutral, it could just be doing work that doesn't conflict with you being you. And that's fine too. You can work a job that allows you to just earn your keep, but doesn't conflict with your own liberation. And that is a phenomenal start compared to a job that causes you to go against yourself and feel dead inside every day. That's not what we want. There's a really great video from this YouTube channel called Freedom in Thought that I love, and I've watched it multiple times. I'll be putting it in the references, but it's about Marcus Aurelius and living a sincere life. And what it talks about, it references Marcus Aurelius, but it also tells a story about a businessman trying to learn how to focus from a monk. And what's really interesting about this story and what comes out of it is that living a sincere life allows focus to come easily, effortlessly, and naturally. Whereas living a life where you're doing things that you think you should do or that you think you have to do is what leads to distraction. In other words, if we're doing work that we think we're supposed to do or we think is the right thing to do, then we're inevitably going to get distracted each and every time, because our mind is going to wander towards what we believe is worthwhile. And the Marcus Aurelius quote that's referenced in that video is something I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't have it in front of me, but it is something to the degree of, does your mind tend to wander? And if it does, choose to learn something worthwhile. Because when you learn something worthwhile, your focus will naturally gravitate towards it. I remember for me, when I first started getting into Zen and Stoicism, when I outline these episodes, when I get into coaching with clients, I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm allowing myself to go into it and become immersed in the process, where I just fall in love with the work itself because it's sincerely what I want to do. It allows me to be me in my work. And therefore, I don't feel the need to be distracted by scrolling through social media or, taking all these breaks. So if you live a life where you're doing what you think you're supposed to do, then it will inevitably lead to distraction. If you choose work that is what you genuinely want to do and that it's meaningful to you and that it brings you joy, you will very naturally allow yourself to be focused and present in the work each and every day.